The path of least resistance is not always the best direction to go in life, but when it comes to playing cymbals and drums, figuring out how to take resistance out of the equation so we can get a big, beautiful sound that isn't exhausting to achieve, definitely the way to go. We're going to talk today both about ride cymbals and hi-hats in terms of technique, but specifically how it relates to sound and ease of use of these instruments. There are some idiosyncrasies when it comes to striking a ride cymbal, as well as playing hi-hats, particularly when the foot becomes involved, that we are discovering not everybody is privy to. Let's begin with the ride cymbal. We want to talk specifically today, for starters, about the grip on the stick and how it relates to our phrasing and how the thing sounds. Let's take a listen to what happens when we move from a loose grip, a very loose grip, to a tighter one, to a hilariously tight one. Depending on the cymbal that you use, there will be audible differences depending on how tightly you hold the stick and also whether or not you're doing it intentionally to achieve a certain kind of sound. But in addition to that, we're also running into trouble with the phrasing of playing on the cymbal, speed limitations, and even possibility of damaging the cymbal if we hit it poorly for a really long time. A glaring example of this is when people start to play faster and faster patterns on the ride cymbal in jazz or in other styles of music where you want to be super consistent and have it sound relaxed and not super tense. If I try to do something akin to this while holding onto the stick tightly, whether for the sake of control or whatever reason, it's just not going to work. Growing up without a drum instructor when I was younger, I definitely started out with a pretty tight grip on the sticks, both for drums and cymbals, because to me, that gave me a sense of control of exactly what I was going to play. And at that time, I wasn't so concerned with how well it was going. I just wanted to emulate my heroes, and my thought process pretty much stopped there. Later on, when I started really taking concerted lessons and trying to understand how to get a good sound, I got round to the idea or the concept of touch. What we mean when we talk about touch is exactly where your intentionality is when you are striking the cymbal. When we're playing a cymbal, we're not hitting it the way that you hit an anvil with a hammer. There's more to it than that. There's a lot of interactions with your fingers to the stick, and then the exact way that the tip of that stick or whatever part of it is interacting with the cymbal. The easiest way to identify different players for me is the sound of their touch on cymbals. And that doesn't just go for jazz, that's in every genre of music. There's nothing wrong with being a basher, it's a choice as long as it's a choice that you're making. But when you get into lower dynamic ranges, denser things, or wanting the sound of the kit to blend together, the way that you touch the cymbal with the stick becomes incredibly important. This makes it a worthwhile endeavor to listen to, and also, now that we have YouTube, watch videos of drummers well outside of your normal range of things that you might listen to, and check out how they hold the stick, how they strike the cymbal, how they place the stick on the drums, and how that sound translates. Visually emulate it, try to emulate the sound, and expand your horizons. Everything that we're talking about in this episode today applies to every single genre of music. If this feels like it's jazz specific or funk specific or any kind of specific. It absolutely is not. This is about longevity of your technique, longevity of your instruments, no matter what you do. Nobody likes breaking cymbals. Nobody likes breaking sticks. Nobody likes hurting their body. So no matter what you do, frankly, especially if you're a heavy hitter and especially if you're playing super aggressive music, all the more reason to pay attention to these kinds of things because you're putting your body through the paces every time you play. So anything we can do, just like any professional athlete, we have to be mindful of this stuff for our own safety. Another thing that we need to touch on here is starting to integrate the bell into our playing. Some people play the cymbal with what we would call a German grip or a palm down grip, and other people play with what is colloquially known as a French grip or with the thumb up. When we start to integrate the bell, this becomes a bigger portion because we want to be able to move between the bell of the cymbal and the body easily utilizing rebound, whether the rebound is off the bell or off the body of the cymbal. Granted, we can play either side of the bell. For me, it's more intuitive to play the side to my left, but the main thing is to make sure that it's an ergonomic motion and that you're not moving more than you need to get the sound you're after. All of this also applies to crashing a crash or crashing a ride cymbal, whatever you might have in front of you. I personally have never cracked a crash cymbal in my life, though some of mine have gotten cracked by friends. I've also never cracked a ride cymbal, and I think personally that this is due to a looser grip, especially when I am really wailing on the cymbal because I'm allowing the stick to resonate, and that allows some of the shock of those vibrations to stay in my hand with the stick and not travel into the cymbal and risk the possibility of really shocking a small location that might be weakened from the manufacturing process. Additionally, and it's not a technique thing necessarily, but if you want to avoid cracking your cymbals, remember not to cinch them down too tight, especially if you're really getting into them with larger sticks. The big takeaway from all of this is that depending on how you hold the stick and how you attack the cymbal at any dynamic range, you're going to change the sound of that experience. Your physical experience will also change, but we're here today to talk about how to get a good sound out and also how to save some energy for ourselves so that we can play a long show, so we can practice for a long time, so that we can play a long song that might be super dense, whether it's jazz, drum and bass, punk, whatever it is. Whether or not you heard an audible difference in the initial demo between the three tightnesses of grip, you have to remember that this type of thing is going to change your feel, it's going to change your time, and it's going to change everything about how the band hears you dictating that time. So remember to experiment with this, move to something looser if you don't already do that, and if you're a very loose player, it can be fun to experiment with tightening it up a little bit to see what the sound and feel change does for you. Now moving on to the other side of the kit, let's talk about these hi-hats. I mentioned earlier that with the hi-hat, there are some things that go on with the integration of the foot that are not necessarily topics of conversation, and I want to jump on that right now. What we're talking about here is endemic of both big hi-hats, little ones, thin ones, thick ones. It shows up in a lot of different ways, and it has to do with just how much pressure we put on the pedal when we want to get a tight sound out of the cymbals. Listen to the sound difference when I move between enough pressure to keep them closed and get a good sound and adding a lot more pressure to try to tighten it up. This is pretty dramatic. It's definitely audible, more audible with these cymbals maybe than with some other ones. But first thing to say is that this is not normally something that players do to get a certain kind of sound. This is more just about wanting the cymbals to be closed tight and putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the pedal. If this is something that you're experiencing, it could be an issue with the cymbals. It could be that you've chosen thinner cymbals than are appropriate for the music that you're making. I've definitely experienced this. It could also be that your settings on the hi-hat stand could take some adjustment, the spring tension and other things like that as well. It's all worth experimenting with, but make sure that you check this out by itself and not in the context of a groove, because sometimes it's not as easy to hear when everything else is going on. I've noticed this issue audibly with a couple of private students of mine, and what turned out to be the culprit, beyond obviously that the cymbals are making a funny sound, is that their posturing and sitting at the kit involved a tremendous amount of pressure on their feet all the time because they're using their feet to balance. And that means that they're sitting essentially like a tripod where the seat is the third point, and they have weight on all three of them all the time. This, in addition to being terrible for your back and terrible for your posture in the long run, means that you're going to be fighting this issue all the time because your sense of grounding and your sense of sitting at the kit is predicated on having a tremendous amount of pressure on the pedals. I also tend to see this with people who habitually bury the beater and stand on their toes in particular, because legs are heavy even if you're not that big of a person, and it can be more than enough weight and pressure to drive this sound out of your cymbals and get you something that's not the best. The other big culprit in running into tricky business with technique on the hi-hat is the height of the cymbals. We see a lot of players out there, maybe jazz guys on one side where they're very low, maybe punk guys on the other side where they're quite high, where they're making playing choices that lead them to having the cymbals at a certain not mid-range height. Anytime we do something extreme with a part of the drum set, we're going to have gains and we're going to have losses. If we have the hi-hats very high, it becomes difficult to play on the surface of them if we want to achieve a tighter, lower dynamic sound. Conversely, if we have them very low and we want to be able to play the edge or do things between the shank of the stick and the tip, we're going to literally run into the snare drum. What this means for us is that if we want to have a versatile playing situation for ourselves, having something in the mid-range where we have access to the flat of the cymbal, the edge, everything in between is going to allow us to move through the tip, the shank, and mixed versions of both. Now the hidden hi-hat elephant in the room. I love playing the hi-hats with my foot. I play them with my foot all the time. I like playing offbeats in backbeat grooves. I like using them for splashy stuff. And if you're not loving the sound that you're getting out of the foot part of this apparatus, check out the screw underneath. I know a lot of people know about it, an awful lot of people don't. If you want to have a good splash sound and a good foot chick sound, we must tip the bottom cymbal using the screw underneath it. What this affords us is very similar to how marching drummers and classical percussionists crash hand cymbals together. They don't slap them together like two pie tins. You have to meet them at the edge, because otherwise we're locking the air inside, if you've ever heard the phrase airlock or something like that, and you're canceling out the possibility of there being good vibration and good contact all around. Hi-hat stands in general, if you don't tighten this up, are going to give you perfect airlock between the cymbals, no matter how heavy the cymbals are, no matter what size they are. Simple solution. It's on pretty much every hi-hat stand out there in the world. Check out how much tilt is right for you, and also remember that orienting the tilter so that you're not hitting the edge of your bottom cymbal and chowing your sticks, very important. for the amount of time that we spend trying to find the right cymbals, trying to find the right sticks, we need to spend at least as much time considering what the right way for us individually is to play these instruments in the music that we make so that we get the best sound possible, keep the life of these things nice and long, not do any damage around, and also make sure that we have fun and honestly don't hurt ourselves. Don't forget that tight grips, not good for the wrist, not good for the shoulders, not good for the back. The older we get, we're all getting older, we have to mind that stuff. So consider first great sound, relaxation, stamina, all of that nice looseness. Let's get back to practicing.